Just remember, when you bring in the forensics people, you have to trace the computer's outline in chalk on the desk.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax, HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs, and joining me is Donna Grindle of Card and Compliance. How's it going, Donna?
It is going fantastic for me today, David.
You sure?
Yes, it is. The power of positive thought.
Very good. So today we're going to be talking about the 5 stages of cyber attack grief, and we have a guest today, another David of all things. And but before we bring him in and abuse him more, then tell us about your schedule coming up here.
Oh, well, I am, our normal routine. I haven't made any changes yet because we're still formatting dates for other things. But June 21st, Valdosta, Georgia MGMA, South Georgia MGMA seminar. So I'll be speaking there and while they try to eat lunch. And then the Atlanta Association of Legal Administrators is July 19th in downtown Atlanta. October 17th in Kennesaw, Georgia at North Metro MGMA. That one's going to be fun. And then in November, I get to go to the Georgia Association of Orthopedic Executives annual conference at Callaway Gardens.
Nice.
Yeah.
I want to go.
Calgon, take me away.
Yep. So we want to jump right into our episode today. We kind of cut the beginning down a little bit because we're going to have plenty of time to talk to David Benton, who is our guest today. He is the Director of Data Forensics for the Southern U.S. part of Altep, whichever you want to pronounce it. I'll let him tell you more about it.
Altep.
So David, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and why we even give a crap about listening to you today.
That's a great introduction.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on today. As you mentioned, I am with Altep, which was just recently acquired by Advanced Discovery. It's kind of 2 companies merging together. We've got offices throughout the United States and a couple in Europe, handling digital forensics, e-discovery, and all of those, all the cyber service spectrum.
The down and dirty, nerdy stuff.
There we go.
Yeah.
Got tongue-tied there for a second.
Hey, it happens to everybody.
So maybe you can check my computer and figure out why my wife's ordering so much stuff on Amazon.
That would be because she has your credit card. So there we go.
Oh, there you go. See? That's
now, if you want to share your credit card, just go ahead and pass that along.
As many times as I've been breached, I think I've shared it enough.
Yeah, I know. David's been in a lot of breaches. But Benton...
Hey. Slow down now.
So, but Benton, you've been a serious part of the military and law enforcement and that kind of cyber forensics, which is, what we always say, we really don't want to know you that way. And we're glad that we know you this way. But let them know how, what your different, varied background is.
So after college, I joined the military where I was a counterintelligence special agent. Some people would say that's the opposite of intelligence. That's what my dad always said, so I go with it. But I did security investigations for the Army. It was a lot of fun. I was there for 5 years. Then I went to work for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation here in Atlanta. I was on their computer evidence recovery team, and I was also there for 5 years. There's something with me and this whole 5-year thing.
Oh, okay.
Then I went to a Fortune 50 company here in Atlanta that you've probably, if you have a home, you've probably purchased something from them. I was in-house for 10 years there. Doing forensics and e-discovery stuff. And then I jumped over and started doing the consulting gig with Altep. So it's been a great ride.
Well, that's cool. So we think you'll stay with Altep a little closer to the 10 years maybe. Or at
there we go. That's it.
At least we won't lose you after 5 now. Because we have met in person because you came to the HIPAA boot camp. So the HIPAA boot camp
ma'am,
is
yes,
not.
ma'am. Did I do it right? Did I do it right?
You did good. You did good. So you can testify to the boot camp. We do have some audio recordings of you that we got you when you were shell shocked, and so
All those push-ups at the boot camp, climbing over the walls and all that stuff. That's, I just
this
hope I
from a
wasn't
guy
out of
that's
breath.
You've really done boot camp, so what are we gonna do? But what we have you here today to talk about is, we always talk about, you got to bring in those forensics people and they need stuff. And we're going to try to do a little bit of a discussion about what that means when we say, you got to bring in the forensics people and they need stuff. And I hope we can manage not to make all three of our propellers start spinning at the same time.
Mhm.
So
Just remember, when you bring in the forensics people, you have to trace the computer's outline in chalk on the desk with the big yellow tape. And
all right.
gotta
We do
trace
tell
it
people
around.
that. We tell them you have to put up crime scene tape, and you need to treat it like CSI.
I actually went on one where there was some tape up, and it was like a civilian thing, not like a law enforcement thing. It was hilarious. You're just,
I love it that you would say civilian.
what in the world are you guys doing? This doesn't make any sense. First of all, there's no crime. So, let's just take all this down. It's attracting attention. You don't want that.
Well, we do need that image to get people to do what you really need them to do. And you and I have been involved in some of these where we didn't have that information. And it does make our jobs harder.
Really, what they need to do is just reach it before they start trying to help. If you've ever had that little nephew that always tries to come inside your room and try to help you with stuff, and they usually tend to mess everything up. What they really just need to do is not do that. They just need to get on the phone instead of start doing what they think they need to do. Just get on the phone and get the people in there who can make sure that they have everything taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
We've worked on been called on a number of cases. Sometimes it feels like it's almost every single week to where, the IT person or the doctor gets on the phone and he starts talking about, 3 weeks ago, they had a ransomware incident strike their practice, and the IT people have come in and they cleaned everything up, and so now they need to investigate it. And you're going,
It's a little backwards there.
3 weeks ago would have been the good time to make the phone call, and then you start asking the IT guy, and IT folks are great people, but their kind of main focus is they got to get the computer system back up and running. The computer's down. Now we got to make it work again. And sometimes with this stuff, they start doing things like reformat C:, format C:, and reinstall the OS. And then they're like, hey, okay, we reinstalled the OS. Now we need you to find all the evidence on it that happened before we reinstalled the OS. And you're just going,
so now we have to say reformat C:, and install it. That means they wiped everything off of the computer and made it like it was new again. So when we were doing this to try and when we were discussing doing this to try and keep us out of the nerd bushes, I was reading an article that it seemed like a good one to give us an outline of what to discuss here so that we don't just go down those rabbit holes. And it was from an article in the Buffalo News, as in Buffalo, New York. The Erie County Medical Center ransomware attack. And they did a whole big, long story on it in the Buffalo News explaining the timeline and what all of that means and, how it all occurred. It's kind of step by step. And in there were some quotes and statements by various people involved that made me realize this was a really good opportunity here for us to use this as an example to show how they went through the 5 stages of grief in a cyber attack. So this quote, it all started at 2 a.m. on Palm Sunday. So in the middle of the night is when it hit. And all of these computers started flashing white screens with red words, what happened to your files? And the doctor that is the Associate Chief of Service for Emergency Medicine, Dr. Jennifer Pugh, said in the interview, for the first few minutes when I learned what happened, I was in a state of disbelief. Then my reaction changed to anger. This is our level 1 trauma center. It felt like a direct attack. So there you have it. You've got the first stage, which is denial. I was in disbelief. The second stage, which is anger, which is what you usually go through. And we go through that with a lot of people. So first they start to notice something's wrong. And like these guys noticed it when their screens all turn white and they got an alarm. We have other people that notice it when they get, like with the Dark Overlord, they sent them a blackmail letter. And you have other people that notice it in other ways. So what ways, without it being something obvious, do you have people realize? We realized it happened when, boom, fill in the blank for match game, Benton.
So sometimes it's just the pop up on the computer screen, right?
Yeah.
But in other occurrences, it is the person sitting behind their desk. They get in, they're trying to open a system or access a system, and all of a sudden they can't get in. It looks like they're not connected. It's not responding. So they end up and call their help desk. And they're like, hey, I can't get in. And so then the help desk person tries, and they're like, hey, I can't get in either. And it spirals downhill from there. And they realize pretty quickly they have a problem.
Right. My computer's really slow. I've had that happen before where, it's 6 o'clock on a Friday night, and I don't know why it always happens like in the middle of the morning with these guys, or, I don't think the criminals know how to do it that way. But maybe they do. But
they don't want you to see them.
Yeah,
They hiding.
But something's going on with my computer. Should I pull the plug? And I'm like, yeah. But that doesn't mean plug it back in and clean it all off, because the first thing they do is like, okay, well, it's no big deal. It can't be that bad. All I need to do is just restore, which is, exactly what a lot of, and I say this not in a negative sort of way, it's just uninformed IT staff. I mean, don't you feel that like you said, they're just trying to help and their job is uptime?
Right. And, with many Windows-based systems, what's the best way to fix your problem? Reboot the system.
When in doubt, bail out.
So that's right. So they'll, reboot it, come back up, and oh my gosh, the screen's still there. Well, I guess we might have a problem. Houston, someone called Houston. There's a problem here.
Yeah, Houston, we have a problem. So those are the steps of denial. This can't be happening. All you need to do is reboot. Let's just call tech support. And even tech support then starts going through their steps. And the thing that we have to find a way to get to those, Sims has tech folks, and we'll just leave it at that. But when you have, they start to investigate a problem, it's not the first thing they think of that something horrible has happened. They just think it's a normal, everyday support ticket that's come in. But then once they have to tell the people in charge, I know, Benton, you usually get in at the point that this part's over.
Right.
But Sims and I experience the anger.
Yeah, like, why didn't you stop this? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Why didn't you click on that thing?
And they're yelling at us, how did this happen? And I can't believe, and what do you mean I have to do an investigation?
I've got the free antivirus software on all our computers. What happened?
Yeah. I'm doing everything you tell me to do. Well, no, clearly not, because this doesn't happen everywhere else. So,
my terminal server's just directly connected to the internet. I don't know why there would be a problem.
Okay, and that's a perfect time and we get this question a lot, and it's a perfect time to ask somebody that has credentials that you're not going to question like you would me and David, okay? When somebody tells you, I'm doing a risk analysis and I'm asking questions about the network, and they say, we don't have to worry about antivirus, we don't have to worry about anything because we use terminal services.
Wrong.
Thank you. No. Next question.
Now, when you use terminal services, you put a huge target on yourself because, there are just tons of ways to get into it. And if you directly connect it to the internet, you are just asking for untold number of headaches. Terminal services is fine as long as it's protected behind a firewall, and only you have to log in through your firewall client in order to get to it, because then it's not available on the big bad internet. But if it's just hanging out there, it is a juicy target for anyone to come in and hit. And I'll tell you, it's not that difficult to get into the systems. They're just not.
Yeah, and there's so many people that, and I read these stuff. I read articles constantly because that's the only way I can survive in this business. And you get a lot of people that aren't technical people, and I've seen more times than I can count where they tell you, oh, the technical people, they'll tell you email's not secure, but then they can't break into your email account if you tell them to. And that they'll tell you it's easy to do, but they can't do it. So, it's not as bad as they tell you. And those are the ones that scare me the most, because you've got those, and then you've got those that have a certain amount of technical knowledge. They really know how Windows Terminal Services works. They know that really well, but that's it. They don't know all the other stuff. And they say, we don't have anything to worry about.
Right.
So when you say terminal services, what we're talking about, and just want to make sure that we're clear here, is you're launching a remote desktop protocol of some sort. And we've talked about it before, about turn off RDP access. It can't be live on the internet. You've got to come through a VPN connection where you connect to the office and then you connect to the terminal services. And even if you're working inside the office, there are still things you have to worry about on those individual devices that are running terminal services.
Right.
Because you can hop on that connection. And they just, there's this false sense of security, which also falls under that denial stage. Well, this can't be happening because we use terminal services. We don't have internet access on that computer. How did it get infected? I don't know, because it's connected to your network. And it's like, you told me, blah, 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 blah. And that whole anger period is a pretty rough time. But at that point, you come in when they've calmed down a tish. And and in the Erie County article, they said we get to the bargaining stage, and they calmed down, and they said they knew that they were going to have to go dark for weeks. But in the hours after the attack, hospital managers had a decision to make. Should they pay the ransom? And they elected not to. So they're already making that bargain of, okay, this is bad. We've gone through denial. We've gone through anger. Now what are we going to do? Because they do have to go down for a period of time. It's not, we can just assume that everything's okay because we wiped it. And you can't just restore everything and know that nothing bad happened. And it's not something where you are waiting around for, David Sims to call you and say, I need you to do forensics, and you can just drop everything and run to David Sims' side.
Well, good for them that they didn't actually pay the ransom, because the reason people keep doing this is because people pay.
Yeah, it's like $1 billion in 2015.
It's huge. And if no one paid for it, eventually they would stop doing it. But unfortunately, too many people, they just keep forking over the money, which only lets them invest more money in their own, meaning the bad guys, the underworld, in their own tools, technology, and people to keep doing this. Because, you don't rob someplace that doesn't have any money. Or,
It's where the bank, why do you rob banks? Because it's where the money is.
Right. And if nobody paid it, they would move on to something else. But unfortunately, too many people, we hear it time and time again where they pay and pay and pay. And then, they come back 6 months later and get another little visitor because somebody else wants to get their payday too.
And I think that is a little known piece of information, that once you pay, it's like you're on a list.
And the thing is that what amazes me is that you have people who pay and then they don't get a security assessment done right after that. So, their house got broken into, they lost all their stuff, their grandmother's jewelry and all that stuff. and yet they don't have like a locksmith come in and check all the locks and go, how'd they get in? What was wrong? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Because,
and that's essentially
forensics,
your job though, right? Is you come in and go,
right.
How did this occur? Let's try to catch the thief. I mean, do you actually, from a forensic standpoint, is your objective just to determine what happened on your customer site and how you can correct it? Or do you try to follow the trail of the criminals, or do you pass that to the FBI? What do you do for it?
So typically, we come in and investigate the particular incident that occurred. As part of that investigation, we many times will create a list of security vulnerabilities that we're seeing as we're working our way through the system, because generally it's not one or two or three vulnerabilities. We're generally talking something in the, a dozen critical vulnerabilities or more. And I mean, I have seen some of our lists of vulnerabilities that have went on for dozens and dozens of pages.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
it's just it's pretty intense, right? Because when you're pulling the backside of the system, you're just finding all the issues that are going on with it. But what our goal is again, not necessarily the security assessment, it is to do the investigation. We have another group of individuals inside our company that their job is to, do vulnerability assessments and penetration testing and those sorts of things. And they do that as a service. And you would be surprised at the people who get hacked and then they don't want to have, someone come in and test the system to see if they can get in, because it's much cheaper to pay, a few $1,000s or several $1,000s to have somebody come in and tell you, here are the 5 top vulnerabilities that are really exposing you to very serious danger, than to wait for any one of those to occur. Because if you have to notify the mailing on the notification, if you've got any number of patients, is going to cost more than what the actual testing and assessment can run.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's insane.
But speaking as a small business owner, and it is clear that you're someone that has worked in the military and for the GBI and Fortune 50s and international companies, because me stroking a check for a few $1,000s, that's got to come from somewhere. And, my budget is very, very narrow.
Sell the Lexus, Donna. Spring for the high-end security assessment. Gotta have the Lexus of security.
Oh, now you should know I drive a Jeep.
But seriously, in all reality, a couple of $1,000s on a security assessment, it's an insurance policy to make sure that your stuff doesn't get hacked. And
well, and our approach, I'll tell you what our approach is, and I think we've talked about this before, is generally with most of the groups we go into and work with, we start, and they're like, people, we've actually gotten clients when they call us and they want a big penetration test. And I'm like, well, have you done a risk analysis? Have you done internal vulnerability scans? Have you evaluated your policies that you have in place to protect things? Well, no, we need to do HIPAA, so we're going to do a penetration test. I'm like, you know what? You're better off doing the internal stuff, because all the penetration tests are going to tell you need to do all this stuff you haven't even looked at.
Right.
So generally we'll start with the basic external scan. So we'll look, and then we do all the internal stuff. And then once we get that stabilized, then we say, okay, now let's go have a real attack, done. And because it is for them a waste of money to have a penetration test and have not done any of the stuff in front, because so many people think that their HIPAA compliance is a whole bunch of binders, annual training, their free antivirus, their notice of privacy practices, and they're done.
Right. Mm-hmm. But there are things that they could do, such as long passwords, that doesn't cost them a single dime. Having
and how long should it be?
6-character, at least 10 characters preferably something in the 14 character range or greater.
So does it have to be dashes?
Uppercase, lowercase, special characters. That's kind of the recommendation. But when you think about it, if you're using a passphrase just with spaces and commas and periods, just put in your favorite sentence and let that be your passphrase.
One of the problems I've run into is that so many of those password checkers are set up to require those specific, you can't just do a passphrase, and that's where we're headed to, is more of a passphrase. But most of them still, when I go to one and it requires me to have exactly 10 characters and it has to have this many numbers and this, I'm just changing the settings on my LastPass, so it's not the same. But yeah, I have, since talking with you, gone through and made sure my LastPass is making 14 now.
Well, and the other thing is a lot of people think that they actually have to remember. They've got 100 different sites that they visit or a dozen different sites that they visit. And, they're just worried if they use a different password on every site that they can't remember it. And there's lots of technology that's free, such as Password Safe, that you can download on the internet. It runs on your computer. You can install it on your phone. You can make multiple copies of the actual encrypted file. You can store all your passwords in there because, that the normal IT person is going to have dozens of passwords for all different systems. And, it's not like we're super smart that we remember, 25 14 character passwords, and they're all not the same. So you put it in the system and you store it there. Post-it notes underneath the keyboard.
No, on the screen.
Yeah, David Sims will have to send you a picture, Benton. You won't believe it. But, but it's not just IT folks. I talk with practice managers and, they have a huge long list by the time they got all the providers and the banks and the different credentialing tools and their EHR and their claims processor. And, it just goes on and on and on. And I actually, David and I both, we've talked repeatedly about the use of LastPass. And we often get the question of, and I always enjoy this, that you're coming to a talk to hear us give you recommendations. And then we say you should use this. And they say, well, that's not secure. Okay. But in your mind, you believe that I know there's one that just got a big bad breach. OnePass, was it? But, we're fans of LastPass. They're actually owned now by the LogMeIn folks, I think. Mm-hmm. And there are some other ones, but if you put 2FA on it and you have a 20-something character complex password, which we can help you build one that you can remember, and that's the one you remember, not the others.
Right.
I think statistically you're way more likely to be safe than without it. Your opinion?
Absolutely. The funny thing is you'll have people who, again, will put that terminal server on the internet with a 6-character password and think they're safe. And you're just going, you are literally just asking for someone to come in and borrow your system for a little while. And they might leave your stuff alone. And then again, they might not leave your stuff alone. And they might take all your stuff and rent your computer out for you so they can make some extra money on it.
And people don't get that. It goes back to the non-technical people saying they don't believe us when we say that. But it's certainly something that you go through that process, and the whole bargaining process of, I'm doing this is enough. I'm doing this is enough. I'm doing this is enough. I firmly am constantly paranoid and think that I'm going to be hit any minute and it'll be Sims's fault. And
it's IT provider's fault. It's always their fault.
Well, he's always taunting people and drawing attention. But
it's because all the links I send her all the time. Here, click this, check this out.
I'm always looking at it and I read it closely because it came from him. But I hover over it, everything. But one of the things, now I want to get us back on our little track here, is one of the things that I know that you and I have talked about is log files, and how little logging is actually taking place. I mean, people log things, but they don't know what to do with them, so they just let them roll over and go away. Or they don't even know that their firewall creates a log, and they don't question their IT people about how are we logging things. So let's talk, because that's often a big bargaining chip when we go in and we've gotten in there with them and you ask them for the log files and they're like, oh yeah, we've got them. And then what they send you is what?
So what we generally see on a firewall is not, it's designed to block, think of it as the walls to the castle. It's designed to block bad people from going in and out. But it's not necessarily going to store a log on the firewall for a very extended length of time. And extended is meaning hours if you're in a bigger system. So if you have a firewall and you need to have the firewall in and running, and you need to be capturing logs. But remember, the firewall is not designed to store the logs on the actual firewall. There's just not, unless you have bought an add-on to the firewall to store those logs, it's not meant to be stored on the firewall. It's meant to be stored somewhere else. And if you're not doing that, you should not expect to have those firewall logs when you need them. And, in that case, you're really kind of doing yourself a disservice.
And what do those logs tell you?
They tell us who went in and out. Think of it just like the gatekeeper on a castle, right? It just keeps a log of, here's Johnny with 2 horses. He came in at this time and he went out with 3 horses at the next day. And, when the guy inside the castle goes, hey, I'm missing a horse, you go to the gatekeeper and you're like, ooh, well, look at this. The guy came in with 2 horses and he left with 3. So there we go. But, the problem is that if you don't actually store the logs somewhere, when you go there and look, it's like, you get the guy with the amnesia at the front thing. It's like, well, somebody came in and somebody left. But we can't tell you when they came in or how many horses they had. So there we go.
Yeah. They got a dry erase board.
That's it. And the other thing is Windows stores a fair amount of information inside the operating system. And so you'll have people that will, buy a modern computer system that has a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte hard drive, and then they'll leave the logging set to the Windows default. And you're just going, you have literally got, the top floor of the Library of Congress can be stored on your computer, and you have your logging set to the default for Windows. So, Microsoft recommends to set the default at 200 meg. I would probably say that's a good starting point. The other thing to bear in mind is if you're running operating systems, and you should not have them installed at the default as they came out of the box. Microsoft publishes hardening guidelines for all of the major operating systems that are out there, meaning they tell you how to configure it to make it safe. And so you should have your IT people go out and ensure that they're following those guidelines to make sure that the systems are, up to snuff and that they're have everything turned on that should be turned on. So,
well, there you go, Sims. Get to work.
I'm already on it.
So I know.
And remember those horses.
I got it.
Then the next stage of grief is the depression part. And that's the hardest part to get them through, because generally in my world, that's when you're doing your investigation. And, these things take time. People think, well, I'm just going to send you the computer, and just like I can click a few things and I can create a spreadsheet, you can do the same thing. And so this was part of the Erie County article. It said in its response, the medical center turned back to paper charts and face-to-face messaging. Easier said than done in any modern hospital that has come to rely on a complex array of integrated computer systems to run every major aspect of the organization, which is very true. And so then it becomes this thing where every day you're getting inundated with the staff. Because now, first of all, we're assuming you've got a business continuity plan.
Yeah.
Which often, this is a better question to ask Benton here. So as we know, if you've prepared, for a ransomware response, then you know what you're going to do when you're hit, and you're going to gather stuff, and you're going to be prepared to get forensics help, and know that your lawyer needs to be involved, and call people like me, and you know what steps are going to take, and you're going to activate your business continuity plan because you know it's going to take a while. How often in your practice do you see people that are prepared that way?
Honestly, rarely. You generally see people come in who are like, hey, we had a problem 3 weeks ago, and our IT people have already cleaned it up, but now we need your help investigating it.
Now, I would just like to ask you, when you had to deal with this with one of my clients, was that the case, David?
No comment.
Yeah, they were
from the government, and we're here to help.
Yeah, I mean, the IT company could only do so many things, but my client knew to call their insurance to get things involved. Then you guys get involved, and they have their business continuity plan. I can't control all of the logging and stuff. I can only make recommendations, let me just say. But they did have their business continuity plan, and in fact, I think they were almost 2 weeks. We had them running on that, so that you could do your investigation, and that matters.
And for some reason, we refer to it in the forensics field as the CSI effect, meaning you have this 40-minute TV show where the bad things happen, and then, the cops come in, they grab the computer with, the web camera on it with the gun right in front of it. They're like, hey, we know what's on here. So, they take it to the nerdy guy in the back, and he types a few things on the actual computer itself that he wipes the blood off the screen, and then he types some stuff, and there it pops up. It's all right there.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work that way. It's there. Forensic science is truly a science. There are meaning, and when I say that, I mean it follows a scientific method. And there are procedures and protocols that are kind of ingrained into your forensics folks that they're going to follow. And that takes time to do all of that. I remember in the GBI lab going in and looking at some fiber evidence and watching where they would have to go into the room, allow the room to sit for so many hours because they had to let all the fibers floating in the air fall to the floor. And then they would go in and sweep certain things and then wait a period of time so that anything that got stirred up and was in the air could fall to the floor. And you have things like that just take an amount of time to happen and occur. Computers don't search themselves very quickly. And so, especially in a modern computer, which holds tremendous amounts of information. So it's going to take time. You just have to be patient. That's why you should involve your forensics folks early as opposed to later. You should involve your legal team early as opposed to later, because the decisions you make in the first few minutes of when an actual event occurs many times determines the outcome of what's going to happen. Meaning, if you stop and think about, instead of just reformatting the hard drive and reloading the operating system, let me call my attorney first. Mm-hmm. Let me call the legal folks first and make sure that I don't have some other obligation out there that would trump getting my computer back up and running.
So don't panic. Don't panic, right. And don't go on autopilot.
Right.
Do something in between.
And I've seen other folks who say, it's almost because they're not sure what to do. I've heard of situations to where they will just activate a business continuity plan and bring in other computer systems and other servers to get them up and running so they can figure out what they need to do with their actual servers.
And that's exactly what the Erie County Medical Center did, is they brought in computers and worked out deals to borrow spare machines from other medical centers in the area. And, it was an overall big response because they were down. And so that takes us into the acceptance part of the thing, because now we've gotten through that process and there's to get to the other end of it. they said after 6 weeks of around-the-clock efforts, 6 weeks to reconstruct its system, they are closer to normal operations. So they're not there yet, but they're close. And no patient data was compromised, which I find interesting. The cyber attack left a lasting impression magnified by a growing epidemic of computer attacks, including the global ransomware extortion that disabled hundreds of thousands of computers this month, because this was written after WannaCry. And it says the medical center follows a protocol for computer issues and uses regular downtimes for part of its system to practice, but no one expected a disruption as long or as extensive as this. So that is when I've sat in when you guys are having to review your report, and you can hear the stress in the air. They're breathing on their other end, and you can hear them stop occasionally because your report does say, here's the consequences. And we've had times where you have to say, we can't tell you whether or not data was compromised.
Right. Because there's just, many times there's no data there that you can say one way or the other.
There's no there there.
There's no there.
No data.
The logs aren't there. There's no footprints for you to follow. There's no, you don't really have some nerd in the corner that can hook 3 different funky wires to it and a tablet. And, I love watching some of that stuff, but every now and then I'll see it and I'm like, that is just too far. Scorpion, I'm talking to you. I did like CSI Cyber. It did a little bit of a better job, and it did some really cool examples. But yeah, those TV shows make it hard for the rest of us. So,
Mr. Robot.
Well, it makes me think though. If you'll remember, kind of in your example, you talked about them going back to talking face to face. I just wonder, in an older hospital which didn't have technology, right? How many additional people did they have to employ in order to move all of that stuff around, right?
Yeah, good point.
So what's happened is, right, we found that technology allows us to become much more efficient. So instead of having, 10 people, we can do the same thing with 5 people. And they've reaped the reward of, not having to hire 5 additional people. There was people, you didn't have to worry about, people playing on Facebook all day, or, you didn't have to worry about, paying for sick leave. You didn't have to worry about overtime. You've replaced those people with technology. But the challenge is that people think they can actualize all of that money, and that they don't need to spend the money on doing security assessments to make sure that those systems are secure, because they have this mistaken impression that they've bought a new computer so it comes out of the box secure. And we have to switch that mindset around to say the computer's just a tool, and you have to ensure that that tool is properly configured and running correctly. And if you don't know how to do it, you have to find the people who have the skill set in order to configure it to run the most optimum way for your particular circumstance. Because these computers are built to cover a wide range of businesses. Not, they weren't specifically designed just for hospitals, or they weren't specifically designed just for a lawyer's office, or just specifically for an accounting office. They're designed to be used in a variety of ways, and what you have to do is figure out just what you need to run your business, and how do you secure the information that you have, right? Because an attorney's office probably not going to have, they don't see patients. They're not going to have probably a bunch of healthcare records. An accounting office is probably not going to have a bunch of healthcare records there, but obviously a hospital would.
Well, and the lawyer's office has some other very, potentially, yeah. So we're working more with lawyers' offices now that aren't even in healthcare. But yeah, I mean, every business has things to protect, and you're right, they just forget about it. In fact, I absolutely love that last little bit, because We've never looked at it that way. We've never talked about it that way, but I think it's absolutely one of the things that we've got to get across is there is a switch off between reducing overhead with people and just plugging in a computer. You still got to do some stuff with a computer. I think that's great.
It's also worth saying too, and David, you can tell me what you think about it, but a lot of these security things aren't, let's bring somebody in and set things up and then, okay, we'll revisit this if there's ever an issue, but we don't really have to monitor it, nor do we have to change it, which I disagree with. I think that anything involving technology and security, number one, has to be monitored, but number two, it's ever changing. So even though it might have been secured 3 or 4 months ago, doesn't necessarily mean that it's still that way.
Yes.
Remember, the Russian government bought a whole bunch of typewriters and brought them back into their organization so that they wouldn't have to worry so much about cybersecurity leaks.
Oh, wow. That in today's environment is quite telling. We'll leave it at that. But I think we could continue talking to you for a while, but we are starting to run out of time. And I did have an ending quote that I think we've hit on it a lot, is from the Global Cyber Alliance Center for Internet Security, he was on the team that did the forensics work for Erie County, Pelgrin, and he said security is not just for the IT department. We all have a responsibility and should be held accountable. And that alone is really what we're trying to do, is build an understanding. And that's another reason we don't try to do all the drill down technical stuff. Good Lord, there's a ton of technical people. But just like what you said, I mean, that is really going to stick with me. Well, you're going to hear it again on the podcast, I guarantee you. You got rid of a person when you put that computer in, but it didn't mean you got rid of any kind of liability that's around it. So,
right.
I have really enjoyed this conversation, but we do try not to hang around too long for our folks. So I do want to I wanted to give you a chance to say, Benton, if you could tell people 3 things that they could do so that they would never meet you.
Don't go in a dark alley at night.
What would those 3 things be?
So I would start with a strong password. Make sure that they have a good password. It's 10 to 14 characters long, that they change their password on a regular basis. And so that would be 1. 2, don't connect a terminal server directly internet. I mean, and for those who have firewalls and just forward, port forward, meaning send everything that goes to the firewall looking for RDP, just send it over to the terminal server. That's not a good idea either, because you're bypassing your firewall. So don't do that. And use a VPN.
All right.
If you passwords, don't connect the terminal server to the internet, and use good VPN. And the list could kind of go on and on and on, because I would, start talking about have a risk assessment done to make sure that what is going on inside your organization, because every company is different. I mean, every company has different needs. Some of them have multiple offices. They've connected the offices different ways. Those sorts of things need to be checked, and don't just assume that the people who are building them and setting them up for you are going to understand security.
Oh, yes.
We've seen many times that they know how to connect it up and make it work, but just because it's working means that everybody in your office can access it, and also everybody outside your office, guess what? They can also access the same thing too, because they just set everything at the defaults. So, but if you need our help, we're happy to come out and assist, and it's altep.com, or you can call our incident response hotline at 1-877-937-3988.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, we made it through now.
Yeah.
I don't have to go through my grief anymore.
No more lurking in dark alleys there,
Yeah.
Simmons.
I know. Well, have to do that on my off time. But it is worth mentioning that OCR actually came out I think it was this week, came out with a little checklist about, if my entity experienced a cyber attack, what do I do now? And it's a little quick response checklist, and I'm sure that Donna will put that in the show notes since she's does everything.
Well, I was thinking we might cover it
separately.
Yeah, I've actually got. We're going to do a whole nother episode on incident response plans 2.0. People need to rethink it. If you've thought about one, you need to rethink it. And if you haven't thought about one, here's what you need to do. You need to do it this way. So that's one of the ones I'm working on right now. But we got a couple of others to talk about too. So lots of stuff going on.
That's for all those people that when you open up their policy and procedure manual, it says thought about it. We'll move them past that.
Enter name here. That's mine. Basically.
Yeah. All right. So that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank David Benton again for joining us and taking us down the whole forensics rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to head over to iTunes and rate the podcast right there on iTunes. You can also rate it on social media outlets as well as share it out on your favorite social media outlet. Visit us on the web at helpmewithhippa.com. If you have a question, you can also leave it right there on the front page, and we may answer it on a future podcast. So remember, for Donna and myself, and David Benton as well, HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.